Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video we got another news and rumor video to discuss. We're discussing some signings from our past couple of days, plus some trade rumors involving the Blackhawks, Jets, Islanders, and the Penguins. I'm going to go to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here at the Nintendo Hockey channel. Before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. We're never able to help you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so we can all discuss today's video. Now, before I begin this video, I just wanted to make a quick announcement that I have added to the background a little bit. I've been able to acquire a couple of retro banners from before the 90s, so I've gotten about, I think it's around 15 to 20 banners with different teams' logos on it, so I'll be putting different banners up in the background just to add some more background to my thing. But today we've got the Rangers and the Sabres banners here, so just want to let you guys know that I've added a little bit to my background and hopefully it helps the background out a little bit. So love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. So interesting note there, but I like these retro logos, so interesting the stuff there. And we got a couple of retro teams. Don't have any of the teams that have been made beyond 1990s, but I do have all the older ones, like even the teams who aren't even in here right now, like the North Stars or Hartford. So interesting stuff there, but that's a quick channel update with me adding to the background a little bit, so definitely love to hear your thoughts on that. We're going to start today's video off by looking at some signings from our past couple of days. Only one signing from our past couple of days was an ELC, and that is the Ottawa Senators have given an ELC to Carter Yakemchuk. Yakemchuk was, I think, the 7th overall pick in this past year's draft. It's a 3-year ELC with the $975,000 that'll begin to start next year, so it continues to be a lot of the players who were drafted in the first round this year getting their ELCs. Yakemchuk this past year playing with the Calgary Hitman over in the WHL, put 30 goals and 71 points in 66 games as a defenseman, so he looks pretty good. He's a right shot defenseman, which is something the Senators desperately need, and I think long term he should be either a solid second pair defenseman or could potentially even be on a pair with a guy like Jake Sanderson. So interesting stuff there, but that's a pretty good pickup there for the Senators to get Yakemchuk to his ELC, and hopefully he should be a really good pickup there for the Senators. But that's the only sign from our past couple days. Yakemchuk signs with the Ottawa Senators, so interesting stuff there, but that's a really good sign there for the Senators to send Yakemchuk to his new ELC. And lastly, going over to a couple of trade rumors. Now, these aren't specifically trade rumors. I haven't heard much about these 4 players on these 4 teams, but I'm just going to go over 4 players who I think are very likely to get moved in season at some point, and I think it's quite likely that we could see some of these teams wind up moving these players. Now, we'll start with the Winnipeg Jets because we talked about them quite a bit over the past while, and that's Nikolai Ehlers. Now, I've heard a lot about him over the past little while, potentially being moved by the Jets. Doesn't sound like he wants to stay in Winnipeg, so it seems like it's less and less likely that's going to be moved before the start of the season. As we get closer and closer to the start of the season, it's less and less likely that these big players like Ehlers, for instance, or Zegras, or anyone like that is probably going to get moved. It's way more likely that we'll see some cost-cutting moves or small players wind up getting moved, like I could say Robertson being moved from Toronto or something like that. So either cost-cutting moves or smaller, lower-end moves are most likely happen before the season starts or before training camp, but it's most likely that we won't see very many huge trades. Maybe we'll see 1 or 2, but it's most likely not going to happen anymore before the start of the season. So I think there's a very likely chance that Ehlers is probably going to have to start the season with the Winnipeg Jets, and I think there's a very likely chance he's going to get traded in season. Now, personally, in my opinion, as it sits right now, I don't have the Jets making the playoffs. I think they're going to take a pretty big step back from last year after the offseason they had this year, and I think they will take a step back enough that they'll miss the playoffs. They'll be out of the playoffs by trade deadline. I think that will lead them to trade Nikolai Ehlers. So I think he's most likely going to be dealt now at the deadline. I think it's more likely that it happens than him still being dealt at some point before the season starts or before training camp. So I think it's most likely that Ehlers gets dealt in season now. And with me thinking that the Jets are probably not going to be a playoff team this year and are probably going to be on the outside looking in come the trade deadline, I think there's a very likely chance that Ehlers does want to get moved at the deadline now. So interesting stuff there. But I do think there's a very unlikely chance that Ehlers gets moved before season starts, and he will probably get moved at some point before the trade deadline. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But that's what I think on Ehlers right now. It probably won't happen before the start of the season. And with me thinking the Jets are going to be a bad team, I think he will get moved at some point before the trade deadline. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Now, next up, a guy who I don't think has been talked about a whole bunch, but I think is a very likely trade candidate this year before the trade deadline, will be Chicago Blackhawks forward Taylor Hall. Now, he hasn't been talked about a whole bunch. We know that guys like Alec Martinez, Craig Smith, Patrick Maroon, who all signed 1-year deals on free free agency are most likely going to get moved at some point around the trade deadline by the Chicago Blackhawks. There's even a potentiality that guys like Dickinson and Foligno, who signed 2-year deals, could also potentially be moved. I think it's more unlikely with their cap hits, but I think it's a possibility. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But one guy I think is a very likely trade candidate is Taylor Hall. Now, the Hawks are probably not going to be a playoff team this year. There's a very likely chance that they're going to miss the playoffs again. They have a decent team. They really improved this offseason, but they didn't improve enough, in my opinion, to make the playoffs this year. So I think they're still going to miss the playoffs. So with that in mind, I think there's a very likely chance that Hall's a potential trade candidate. He's entering the final year of his deal, just like Ehlers has a $6 million cap hit, coming off a season where he did suffer an injury earlier on in the season and did have to miss a majority of last year. So that was a really bad blow there for him. But I do think there's a potentiality there that he's still really good 40, 50, maybe even 60-point player, and there would be a ton of teams, even though with his injury history, who would love to have a guy like him. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but I think there's a very likely chance that we could see Hall be moved at around the trade deadline, maybe a little bit earlier, but I think that's a sort of name that hasn't really been talked about a whole bunch, that I think is a very likely trade candidate for this year at the trade deadline. So we'll have to wait and see, but I think Hall's a really likely trade candidate. Another likely trade candidate for the deadline potentially would be Brock Nelson, in my opinion. Now, I have the Islanders barely missing out on the playoffs right now, just as my current projections, but I have them hovering right around the playoff mark at the trade deadline. So I wouldn't say it's 100% guarantee they do move Brock Nelson, but I think if they have Nelson, who's a really good goal scorer, solid second line center, and can really provide some leadership to a team who's in a playoff hunt, if they have him as a potential trade chip, even if they're on the cusp of potentially making the playoffs, I think they might consider trading him because he's a really good player. I don't see him extending in New York, and I think he will help a lot of teams. I would get the Islanders a really good haul, and we know the Islanders have a really bad prospect pool and not too much draft capital, so personally I think there's a likely possibility that if the Islanders are out of a playoff spot or hovering around one come the trade deadline, I think Nelson is a very likely trade candidate to get moved by the Islanders. I know the Islanders really like to keep their band together, like to keep all of their guys that really went to that Eastern Conference Final those past couple of years. I think it was like in 2020 and 2021 against the Bolts together. But personally, I do not see Nelson being able to stay in New York beyond next year. And I think there's a very likely chance that as long as the Islanders are not in a playoff spot come the trade deadline, or they're not in a guaranteed playoff spot, I think there's a very likely chance Brock Nelson could be moved by the Islanders. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And lastly, with the Pittsburgh Penguins, he's not pending UFA, so I think it might be a little bit less likely for him to get moved. But another guy who I think is a very likely trade candidate at the trade deadline would be Brian Rust. Rust is another really good player. He's got 4 years left on his contract, if I'm correct, at just over $5 million. He's a pretty good top six scorer. I don't see him being with the Penguins long term. They're still trying to go through a retool, rebuild phase, but I'm not sure if Rust really factors into that long term. So I could see him be moved at this year's trade deadline. He would be help a lot of teams. He would be signed for, at that point in time, 3.5 years. He could help a lot of teams in their top six. Like if Buffalo, for instance, was able to be in a playoff spot, could use some more forward help. I think there would be a lot of teams who, if they were in playoff spots and were looking to try and make the playoffs, they could use Rust, not only for the next upcoming playoff run, but for years to come. And Rust is still a solid player who can put between 50 and 60 points. So in my opinion, if the Penguins are once again out of a playoff spot come the trade deadline and they do want to sell some more pieces, they could look at some of their penny UFAs, which is possible. I highly doubt Crosby gets moved, but there could be other players who they could try and look to try and move off. But I do think that even though he's got a little bit of term on his contract, they could also look to move off from a guy like Brian Rust. So we'll have to wait and see. But that's my opinion on those four guys and who I think could potentially be moved at the trade deadline this year. So definitely left your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. Remember, no real rumors that I've heard. These are just speculations that I think are potentially going to happen, but definitely left your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. Do you see the Islanders moving Nelson if they're around the playoff spots? And if so, what do you think they could get for him? Do you see the Penguins moving Rust if they're out of a playoff spot? And if so, who do you think they could try and move him to at the trade deadline? And what sort of a package do you think they'll be able to get for him? Do the Hawks move Hall at the trade deadline? And if so, what sort of a package do you think they will be able to get for him? And do the Jets move Ehlers most likely now at the trade deadline? Is it most likely it'll happen in season now, do you think? And if so, what sort of a trade package do you think they could get? Definitely have to get thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. Plus what I think about the Yakemchuk signing in Ottawa. Definitely have to get thoughts on all of that But that's what I'm talking for today. Until this video, if you're interested, subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support and videos with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so I'll discuss in today's video. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So if you check that out, leave a link down in the description below. And can't see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.